Hey everybody, can you hear me okay? All right, thank you so much, Plum. That was amazing. I told them, I heard like a sneak peek of it, and I told them we're like a good pair because they're gonna bring the energy up, and I'm gonna equalize. Um, so I'll do my best to do that. A few quick thanks. Thank you for having me back, Leah and Adam, as well as Gwen and Travis, whose next chapters I'm really excited to get to celebrate. Thank you to my fellow staff members who for their open arms and their very, very gentle hazing, emphasis on gentle. The story I'm going to read from is recently appeared in Conjunctions, so I just wanted to thank Brad Morrow and Taba Conwall, who's here, and it was lovely to meet. And yeah, and I just want to say that it's funny that throughout the conference so far, I've had a lot of conversations about movies, so I thought it would be appropriate or overkill, to read a story that is about a movie critic. So this is called Febrile. The woman was obliged to leave her house by 3:30 each day, when the man she had been living with the past 20 years returned to move out more of his things. Working 2 hours a day, he estimated it would take him a week. On the first day, she brought an umbrella, wore walking shoes, carried a heavy coat as well as a windbreaker. She found her way to the movie theater and, in the following days, began going there directly, leaving behind the tools for surviving outdoors, realizing she was more interested in trading one interior space for another. She had been a film critic for one of the largest papers in the city, where she had a reputation for being negative. Recently, given this period of upheaval and reassessment, she flipped through the pages of the 8 photo albums in which she'd collected each review. Her negativity, having predated the internet, was milder, craftier, more civil and constructive than what would be deemed negativity today. Colleagues assumed the internet had compelled her retirement, but it was the movies themselves, so bad they only drew more negativity from her, a negativity that was both the natural stance of her trade, holding filmmakers, studios to an ever higher standard, and exhausting. She walked through the movie theater at midday, alone but for the kids running the place, strapped into their work suspenders. The first movie she saw here, the first American film she'd seen in years, involved a man and woman, 2 sexual magnets held apart by a series of misunderstandings, mishaps, and problems of scheduling. The film was a downhill ride of satisfied expectations, leading to a final scene which removed its self-imposed obstacles to allow the sex magnets to latch. She felt there was something soul-crushing about seeing a movie that held not a single surprise, not a single line that could shake you from the stupor of your life, from the warm bath of lulled consciousness. It had once been too much for her to sit through these films, then prepare a review, explain why something was irredeemably bad with a level of detail and artfulness totally absent from that which she described. Then, on her way out, Ellen remembered the ticket girl had told her the male and female leads were dating. The detail had not been filed away for later, but now appeared. There was some strange significance in the fact that the 2 people she'd just been encouraged to imagine in acts of conjoined passion, were presumably performing such acts at will, in the girl's words, real life. She couldn't stop watching movies, but she'd stayed away from American films. The best film she'd seen recently came out of Denmark. The first act involved a man and prostitute speaking and eventually having sex in a hotel room. In the second act, we learn the man is a writer and was caught by his wife, whose computer hard drive was filled with pornography. She was distraught, and in order to comfort her, he lied that he'd only been doing research. As she pressed him, the man created an entire novel's plot centered around high-end prostitution. The wife tried to believe him, and in order to fortify her belief, he embarked on the research he invented, his motives becoming unclear. Ellen's own motives were becoming unclear. She was punctual and consistent with her arrivals at the movie theater, and this marked her as strange. Even if her movie didn't start until 5, she arrived at 3:30 and walked the passageways of the theater. The carpet was cheap and, though presumably designed to resist stains and embedded popcorn crumbs, was covered in stains and popcorn crumbs. The young people running the place were glued to their phones, smiling out of the corners of their mouths, appearing sinister with their personal source of grin-worthy material. Whatever their generation turned to after the collective screens, the communal screens of the same theater in which they worked, failed them. Even the plot of the Danish movie was a bit too neat, too ordered, but at least it took a conceptual risk. The prostitute, of course, was not a prostitute. In the 3rd section of the film, we learn she is an actress, about to debut in a play in which she plays a prostitute. Her part is small but memorable, and the play is to be performed at Copenhagen's premier theater. The play's director, a woman who, like the high-end detail, seems to remove some of the more sinister implications from the film, criticizes her for pretending to be a prostitute, the same way a girl pretends to be a woman. Has she ever been touched by a strange man? Has she ever come so hard she thinks it is another scream erupting from her throat? So on and so forth, until the actress realizes what she must do. She calls a girl she knew from acting school, who is better connected with the seedier social world of Copenhagen. They meet, and the girl explains how what she does, high-end prostitution, is not so different from acting. In fact, she says, there is more dignity in it, and she conveys this in the way she carries herself, dressed to the nines, head held high, a woman much stronger and more self-assured than our actress, who, as the rendezvous is scheduled, seems to form an unspoken question in her doe eyes. Ellen smirked at the comparison between prostitution and acting, an elbow to the ribs of those in the industry. But even when she stopped watching American movies, she couldn't stop watching movies. She knew people who didn't watch movies, didn't read books. They were hardened individuals, covered in a rind of self-inflicted neglect. She could admit to a bit of hardening, only natural given her age, but she was not one of these people able to live apart from the mechanisms of culture, who owns a television only to watch American football. American films, American football. She was becoming anti-American. Maybe it wasn't the home she felt displaced from, but the homeland. The sense of anonymity she felt at the movie theater among the distracted young people would be expanded by leaving the country altogether. She thought often of Madrid. She'd once seen a Spanish guy, shirtless, standing with some friends in a park. She heard him say American football in his thick Spanish accent. Her movie today involves a kidnapped girl and a retired CIA agent whose job it is to recover her. He finds her a quarter of the way in, and the rest of the movie involves them telling each other their backstories as they dodge and counter a series of attacks from the Mexican drug cartel. They fall in love, and it made sense. They'd experience more together than two people reasonably will in a lifetime. In the final scene of the Danish movie, the writer and his wife are happier than ever. He's satisfied with the pages of his new novel, as is his agent, as is his publisher. He takes his wife out to a show, the one in which the actress plays a prostitute. She receives a standing ovation. Her scene, though small, held the play's emotional core. The film had an obscenely happy ending, and that was fine, because whatever truth it held was not obvious. The shirtless Spanish guy was not actually Spanish. He was tanned, perhaps from being often shirtless outdoors. He spoke in his normal voice and accent, and it was clear the accent with which he said American football was, if anything, a poor affectation. It surprised her how easy it would be to remember that moment differently, and if she did this often enough, the way she wanted it to be would be the way it was. The man with whom she'd spent the last 20 years of her life was not a culturally disconnected individual. He did watch American football, but not to anywhere near the degree it would take for this to have been the reason they were now separating. Had this been the case that he was brash, lacked sensitivity, and an artful inner life, it would have been a cliche that could only reasonably sustain the first act of a movie, which would imply, if not promise, 2 fulfilling acts still to come. Thank you. Speaking of 2 fulfilling acts still to come, the next one is Sakinah Hofler. Please welcome her.
Hi, everybody. Okay. All right. I just want to thank Leah, Gwen, Adam, and Travis, as well as my Sewanee Writers Conference family. Thank you all for being so supportive. I'm a little nervous today. Like, I was looking at my name tag and it says fiction, poetry, playwriting. So naturally, I'm going to read nonfiction today. This is an essay in progress. We'll see. Here's how it goes. This is about the time I dated a murderer, and I knew he was a murderer. Origins or dangerous creations. And it has an epigraph from James Baldwin. People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them. His name was Jesse, and he had soft brown eyes. He sat behind me in New Community Corporation summer class. New Community Corporation, NCC, plucked promising high school students from the Newark, New Jersey area, provided us with summer jobs, took us to theme parks like Six Flags, on college tours, had us attend training classes. I can't remember exactly what the classes trained us on, but it seemed every week someone wanted to talk to us about our futures. Here, one person would say, it's how to apply for college. Here, another person would say, it's how to write essays for college. Here, another person would say, is a list of colleges to think about. All of them insisted, it is okay to leave Newark, get the hell out of here. Take a look at these historically black colleges and universities. During our first training class, I asked Jesse if that was his real name. Every male I knew had a street name, Shy Bug, Baby D. I told him the only Jessies I knew were Jesse Jackson and Jesse from the Babysitter Book Club series. His response, oh, you like to read? Me too. I was really into Goosebumps and Fear Street when I was little. Jesse often wore button-down long-sleeve shirts every day, despite the heat and humidity of Jersey summers. But one day, he showed up in a t-shirt, and on his upper right arm, I noticed the etchings of a tattoo, and I begged him to see it. He pulled away, but I yanked up his sleeve. When I first saw the tattoo, I thought he wanted to hide it because it was ugly as hell. He was sable, smooth, but the tiger, it was pale, almost a disease shade of orange, and had a small face and a malnourished body. I ran my fingers over the jagged, lumpy stripes and felt the 3-triangle burn on his shoulder. The oblong tiger tattoo covered up his dog paw. He was a gang member, a blood. What did you have to do to get that? I asked him. What I had to, he said. In the early 90s and late September, we had heard rumors about the gangs from the West Coast coming east to New York and Jersey, the Bloods and the Crips. They would emerge on Halloween and slice the throats of young public school children as a part of their initiation process. They would have shootouts until one gang prevailed, either the red side, the Bloods, or the blue side, the Crips, and those killed in the process would be collateral damage. Many parents did not let their children go trick-or-treating that day. Of course, none of that happened. Why would we do that? One Crip asked me later when I asked him if it was true. That's the dumbest, cruelest shit I've ever heard. My crew has kids, you know. Still, one by one, my male friends and neighbors started to rock blue or red and white beaded necklaces, their fingers acrobatic curled C's for the Crip sign or stretched fingers for the Blood sign. Friends kept me updated. Baby D got shot, Keith got shot, Moo got shot. Even when the internet started to post these news stories, I could tell a difference between victims with some type of street affiliation and the victims the news deemed worthy enough to name. Whenever it was street affiliated, there was a sentence, maybe a short paragraph, sometimes naming the victim, sometimes not, and it was always, always no known suspects. We understood the police considered these deaths to be collateral damage, that they wanted the streets to do their work for them. My mother, born in the rural South, was the only one who tried to lift the blinds to peek outside when we heard gunshots. My father, sister, and I would yell at her from our sitting positions on the floor to stop looking, to get down, and she insisted that if she cut off the light, they wouldn't see her. For nearly 2 decades, I had a recurring nightmare of my mother opening the window after a shooting and getting shot herself. Jesse's older brother, a blood, had been hanging out in the Bronx with another friend, another blood, and they were both shot by a gang member from the Latin Kings. Jesse's brother wound up on life support. Jesse sought out the Bloods and told them he wanted to join. They appreciated the personal nature of his desire and told him they would find out who shot his brother, and his initiation would be simple: kill the person who shot his brother. They even loaned him a gun free of charge. And Jesse did just that. Do you feel bad, I asked? We were supposed to be peer reviewing our drafts of our personal essays for college. Both of our essays sat on a desk in front of us unexchanged. I wouldn't have done it any other way, but I still don't like some of the stuff that they do. So he pointed at his ugly tiger tattoo. The Crips weren't founded with a violent history. One of the founders, Stanley Tookie Williams, noted that gang activity in South Central stemmed from the economic decline following World War II, as well as exclusion and racial isolation, which led to joblessness and poverty. Black boys were excluded from organizations such as the Boy Scouts. In fact, the goal of the Crips was to create a powerful force to protect blacks from the racism and brutality they've been suffering from the local police force. What started as a political organization devolved into the Crips on account of the members being high school age, and eventually became the Crips. The main source of income was selling crack cocaine. They brokered deals with Mexican cartels, and as with any drug selling, territory is important, notoriety is important, and so they eventually engaged in violence. The Bloods were formed by other local gangs tired of being bullied by the Crips. Their name comes from the colloquial greeting males give each other on the street: "What's good, blood?" And they became the rivals to the Crips. Tribalism took care of the rest. Michael K. Williams once hosted a show on Vice Network called Black Market. Each episode focused on illicit trade. The first episode was filmed in Newark, which has the biggest port on the East Coast. People stole cars all the time to ship overseas. There were other episodes about gangs, thieves, poachers, scissor. I noticed a similar thread running through each episode, with people saying, "I couldn't earn money doing this. I couldn't find work doing this, so I did this instead." In Disintegration, the Splintering of Black America, Eugene Robinson divides Black America into 4 groups. 1, a mainstream middle-class majority with a full ownership in American society. 2, a large abandoned minority with less hope of escaping poverty and dysfunction than at any time since Reconstruction's end. 3, a small transcendent elite with such enormous wealth, power, and influence, think like Obama or Oprah, that even white folks have to genuflect. 4, 2 newly emergent groups, individuals of mixed race heritage and communities of recent Black immigrants that make us wonder what Black is even supposed to mean. I consider my household to fall under number 1, the mainstream middle class America, though in Newark, with a population density of 11,458 people per square mile, the middle class, the emergent group, and the abandoned inevitably intermingled, overlapped, and formed their own new groupings. During the summers in the 60s, my father worked in a hardware store and assumed he would work there for the rest of his life. The owner, a wonderful Jewish man whose store had been one of the few left unscathed during the hot anger of the Newark riots, told my father he would not have him working in a hardware store when he could be in school. I recently learned my father had gotten into Princeton and Brown and turned both of them down. My aunt told me he did that because their parents were paying her way through college and he didn't want to put any financial burden on them. But when I asked him about it, he said, "I was scared. I couldn't go to those schools. I didn't belong." My father wound up getting a full ride to Rutgers, New Brunswick. During his junior year, a car full of white men drove down the main drag, aimed a shotgun at him, and said, "Get the fuck out of our town, nigger." In Leland, North Carolina, my mother was one of 5 Black students selected from the 11th grade to integrate a nearby white high school. The Black high school's principal had picked the best and the brightest. When it was time for my mother to graduate from that newly integrated high school, the guidance counselor refused to send her transcripts to the colleges she applied to and informed her she would graduate number 3 in class. I know you think you have the highest GPA, the counselor told her, but we have a rule in this school that you have to be here at least 3 years to graduate valedictorian or salutatorian. They had just created that rule that month when they realized my mother had earned the highest GPA in her class. They could not have her giving the valedictorian speech. Luckily, a new guidance counselor started later that year and sent my mother's transcripts to her desired schools, and she got a full ride to Winston-Salem University. Sometimes when people hear about my parents' scholarships or my own scholarship, they say, well, of course you got one. The subtext, you're black. The subtext, you didn't earn it. When my future sister-in-law got into Princeton, and the salutatorian of her high school did not, the salutatorian told everyone, of course she got in, she's black. When we dropped my sister-in-law off at Princeton for the summertime freshman enrichment program, dedicated to helping establish a community for blacks coming from across America, someone had hung a noose in the window of the dorm across from the dorm the black students would be staying in. For all 4 years at Princeton, my sister-in-law doubted herself. Sometimes I get really mad. I think about redlining with housing and how when my grandparents had enough money to buy a house in Newark, they couldn't. It wasn't the South. They didn't see the signs my mother grew up seeing, no blacks allowed, but they knew. Blacks in Newark had to live in apartments with slum landlords who overcharged them and never fixed anything. Eventually, my grandparents got a house through reverse redlining, paying more for the home than what it was worth. For decades, many black people wanted to own businesses in Newark but could not. Once when I was driving with my parents down 109, a route close to Newark Airport full of fast food joints and motels, my father complained, the Indians own all of this. It should have been us. I was shocked because I had never heard him say anything so problematic. And I said, Daddy, if we wanted to own motels, we could have. We just have to work harder. It was only after researching the Newark riots for a different project that I realized we couldn't have, at least not during that time. Not unless we won a lotto or got a mysterious inheritance. For many years, no one would loan black people in Newark money to open their businesses. I think about what it's like to be told for generations that you cannot live in certain places due to the color of your skin, you cannot open a business, you cannot get loans, or if you do, you're going to pay. You're going to pay higher rates, you're going to pay for it for the rest of your life. And while you're paying this color tax to try to make a living, while you're working your ass off to try to fit in, you're going to be filled with self-doubt the entire time because your classmates and your peers and your coworkers will allude that the only reason you've ever gotten anything is because you're black. You're never good enough, even when you work twice as hard, you're never good enough. And it's not just about not being good enough. What people really mean when they say things like that, you don't belong here. We are excluding you. So what do you think happens when people are excluded? You band together and you find a space where you belong and make a space of your own. For some, it's considered, quote unquote, respectable. For example, HBCUs, black fraternities and sororities, religious organizations. For others who are tired of trying, for people like Jesse's brother and Jesse, becomes the underground, the illicit, the gangs. Martin Luther King Jr. once aptly noted, it's all right to tell a man to lift himself up by his own bootstraps, but it is cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his own bootstraps. One might think that my recognition of Jesse's violence led to our breakup, but it was the usual nonsense. He couldn't keep it in his pants. Last I heard, he married the woman he cheated on me with, joined the Army, and is now raising a family of his own in North Carolina. I eventually wound up marrying a wonderful, nerdy prep school guy whose closest brush with violence is through his video games. When I told my husband about Jesse, he asked, how could you date someone who did that? How could you be okay with dating a murderer? I didn't have an answer for him then, and in a way, I'm still searching for an answer now. But what I can say is this. I saw Jesse, I understood who he was, how he got there, and I saw precisely if this world had been different, who and what he could have been. Thank you. And I'm going to bring Anessa Ibrahim up on the stage.
Hi, everybody. I gotta get my mask out of my earrings. Three really hard acts to follow. I want to just start by saying thank you so much to Leah, Gwen, Adam, all the staff. Travis, oh my God, I'm so nervous. I haven't been in front of a crowd in so long. Thank you all. I am reading from a novel in progress that I started late last year. It's called The Dogs. I'm going to read you around pages 5 through 9. So in those first 5 pages, what you need to know, what you end up learning, is that, it's basically a novel that is a portrait of a marriage that goes terribly wrong. It's increasingly disastrous for both parties who love each other in really twisted ways. And so you meet the husband, the eventual husband, Sam Hanna, who is 41. He immigrated to the States when he was 28 and has been just moving up in terms of trying to buy, one condo to another. And he finally bought his first house. He teaches biology at a community college. And he's now in this big house all alone and is realizing that he's kind of reached the end of something. And is maybe wanting a family, more out of pressure, social pressure than anything, but he's considering. And so, that's all you need to know. Thanks for listening. That fall, Monroe saw record-breaking winds. The town was dense with trees whose canopies mashed and roiled. Officials took the flags down outside the courthouse and left the empty snaps to clang against the poles. The owner of the bike shop wheeled out cruisers to display, but after doing 2 and going for a third, he heard them tip over and ran to retrieve them. Across the street, not trusting her ladder, the old woman changing the letters at the village cinema stopped partway through her task so that as far as anyone could tell, all movies stopped showing after 2. Meanwhile, one neighbor's property turned up in another's yard. Rose bushes lost their buds to the grass, and it seemed the grass was blooming. Then the petals were blown into the sidewalks, then the streets. As traffic stalled and rerouted around battered trash cans and broken fronds, drivers panicked when trash skittered lifelike into the road. And all this on top of drop-offs at the elementary school had Greenleaf Avenue backed up past the old Episcopal church, where ravens gathered in the arches of the bell tower, their feathers blown visibly askew. His mother lived alone, close to the boys' prison, which marked, at least architecturally, the boundary between Old Monroe and the Monroe that later came to sprawl. He worried how she was doing with the weather and wondered, because she hadn't called, if she still had power. On average, she called him twice a day, and he answered once. It was her latest belief that if he was going to be single, he might as well save his money and live with her. But annoyed as he could get, Sam never failed to answer. After lunchtime passed, and he still heard nothing, he decided to go over. He made it as far as the library when the car ahead of him came to a sudden halt. He had never been in an accident before and was stunned by the sheer noise of it. The impact took out his headlight and dropped the other car's fender. Both pulled over, and Sam got out, but when he stood at the driver's window, the woman behind the wheel would only roll it down a few inches to speak with him, as if afraid he'd reach inside and pull her out. She was Norma Cano, 20 years old and living with a mother and stepfather whose sole interest in her was $400 a month and a utility bill of her choice, though they never let her see the bills ahead of the choosing. She lived east of the scrapyard and the old creamery, on the treeless side of Monroe. She rimmed her eyes with eyeliner and kept her hair tied up on work days, long and black and thick, so if she washed it on a Monday, it wouldn't dry until Tuesday night. Her sisters, who were just a few years older, had already married their ways out of the house, and only she and the younger half-brother she despised remained. She went through her days of working part-time in a reception training program and part-time bagging groceries and part-time taking courses at the local junior college with the detachment of someone in the middle stage of a wretched life, and this lent her a certain distinction in the minds of her bosses and teachers, who caught themselves now and then regarding her as more of a peer than employee or student. Sam looked at her and saw a young woman who had yet to grow out of her own recklessness. "Why'd you stop like that?" he said. "Shit, I don't know. There was a squirrel." The wind whistled through the cracked window. He pointed to a brown burger wrapper caught in the far gutter. "That? I thought it was a squirrel." She was clearly agonized and certainly very pretty, but he could not let a lesson go unlearned. "Okay, but even if it's an animal, you still have to keep going, even if you kill it, or you could really hurt someone." He registered her look as a judgment upon him, though he was only being practical. Don't get me wrong, he wanted to say. He was not without affection for other creatures, but he would not justify himself to this girl. I'm not going to kill something on purpose. I didn't say on purpose. Well, I didn't stop the car for the fun of it, she said, all traces of agony gone. What do you want me to do? Come out and look at the damage. I need to check my car for damage. The back of your car is all... I'm not getting out with you standing there. What? You're looming. I'm just standing. Stand over there. She pointed to the far end of the street. You want me to cross the street. I want you to give me room. I'm not crossing the street. Why? He dragged a hand down his face. Are you serious? Then go back, she said. Go over to that house. He turned to look. That's not a house. Oh my God, she said. Her car was an old sedan with the paint dulled from age and the hood a different color than the rest of it. She drove off with her bumper scraping the pavement, leaving him standing in the road. He kicked his tire with force and then looked hard at the tire for a long time until he felt calm enough to drive again. And then there's like a jump of a few pages, and then we get back. With his car still in service, Sam took the bus to and from campus all the following week. On Friday, Norma saw him board the 42 and pay the fare self-consciously. She was more baffled than angry. She spotted him right away. She would remember that for the rest of her life, how her eye had gravitated to him so fast and naturally that in hindsight it became easy enough to credit something like fate. He took a handicapped seat near the front. Eventually, he noticed her too and stole glances without ever catching her eye. She was prettier than he'd been able to tell from only seeing the side of her face. He watched her gather up her dark hair, the long process of her carefully smoothing bumps, collecting strays, tucking wisps, and locating the ideal placement on her crown, all so that in the end, she just dropped it loose behind her. She requested a stop, but instead of waiting for the back door to open, she kept walking toward the front, rotating her body now and then to avoid bumping riders with her hips, though her hips were nowhere wide enough to touch anybody. He couldn't help but notice her legs, shorts in this weather, and her knees bore the scars of old scrapes. She was tall and slender, and he could have hoisted her over his shoulder and launched her like a spear. She grabbed the rail to steady herself against the coming lurch and said, "You had all this time to come say sorry, and now I'm getting off," then waved pardon to the driver for exiting through the front door. Her boldness made him bold, and he grabbed his bag and followed her off the bus, down the sidewalk, across the strip mall parking lot. She was fast, 20 feet away. "What are you doing right now?" he called. She squinted back at him. They went to Bossy's, where the large bar wrapped 360 degrees and there was nowhere else to sit but at it. "You want to know how many accidents I've been in?" "Uh-oh. Wanna guess?" "I don't know." 11. He had to take a beat. 11? No. 12. No. 11. 11. She made deep, wise nods. Were they all your fault?" She smiled and touched his arm. "Fault is boring. The more interesting question is, did I end up dating any of the drivers?" He let himself smile. He enjoyed how lightly she seemed to take life. Nothing couldn't be joked about or laughed at. She'd already brought out a side of him that he hadn't seen in years, running after her like that, impulsive, conversational. Upon learning she was 20, he ordered another beer. The bartender was an older woman with melting neck tattoos who didn't card. When she replaced his empty bottle with a fresh one, he said to her in front of Norma, "Let me ask you." "Ask me." "How many accidents have you been in?" "Car?" "Yeah." She leaned her hip on the counter to think. 2, she told them, but one of them was my cousin driving. There was a dead deer in our lane. Had to go right over it. Had no choice. It really fucked the car. She left to take another order. Norma laughed, blood going hot into her cheeks. She liked to be teased. She knew she was in the presence of a type of man she'd never known before. He was calm and serious, a little awkward, and looked her in the eye whenever she spoke. The whole time they sat together, she fussed over her looks. She folded and unfolded the sleeves of her overshirt, blotted her eyes with her knuckles, adjusted her posture. After some time, she grew desperate to know what she looked like to him and excused herself to the ladies. She considered what his life was like, a professor with a house. She'd just broken up with her high school boyfriend, though they still slept together now and then. He rode a motorcycle, worked in an ice cream shop, and played guitar in a band which had booked only 4 gigs, and all of them at strip clubs. She primped in the mirror a long time and came out looking exactly the same. For the next hour, he watched her drink. He learned that she was working towards her associates in criminal justice and listened to her describe the autopsy that one of her classes had recently gotten to witness. She was good company for a while, a big smile. You could see her youth better when she smiled. They were able to sit through the natural pauses of talk without much tension in the air. But as the hour tipped over into 2, she got more drunk and he more sober, and her charm began to wear thin. At some point, lifting and tilting to face him, she missed her mouth and a dribble of beer ran from the bottle straight down her jaw into the hollow of her collarbone, where it sat in a little pool until she finished her swig. She gave a bold laugh and rubbed it out with her thumb. "I'm so bad at drinking," she said. "It doesn't seem like it," was his sorry reply. His mood was beginning to turn, and he was relieved when she ordered a big basket of fries, something to soak up the booze without him having to raise the idea. He did not have an easy way of taking her home and would have to walk the streets with her next to him. She ate the fries 3 or 4 at a time, covering her mouth with a napkin to chew. When they stepped into the evening light, she had streaks of wet all down the front of her shirt. He pointed and said, "Uh-oh. You got me drunk." "You got you drunk. I just paid." "Oh, it's like that?" He was embarrassed. "No, I enjoyed your company." But he wanted to get home. She was starting to grate on him, this sloppy attitude. She said, "Can we see each other again? Would you want to?" He looked at the street, already walking down it in his mind. "Okay." He brightened a bit. "Sure, yes." She gave him her number on the back of a Hoover Ranch Market receipt that didn't say what she had bought, only that it had cost $6.99. He took her as far as the next corner, but she insisted on going the rest of the way without him. Thank you so much for coming.